The committee will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Without objection, members of the full committee not on this subcommittee are authorized to participate in today's hearing. The committee is meeting today pursuant to notice to hear testimony on promoting inclusion, examining the diversity practices of America's workforce. I now recognize myself for 4 minutes to give opening statements. Today's hearing seeks to focus solely on retention and promotion of diverse talent. We can't just focus on recruitment, which we already know is subpar sometimes. Too often, organizations place such a heavy emphasis on pipeline development that retention aspects to diversity and inclusion practices are often neglected. Research shows that many business leaders, primarily white heterosexual males, underestimate the challenges diverse employees face in moving up the ladder in the workforce. In 2019, we have ongoing evidence from the data diversity requests that this subcommittee made to the top mega banks of the country on financial service industry, demonstrating that women and people of color are woefully underrepresented and unrepresented in leadership positions. Even more so in 2018, Women in the Workplace survey conducted by the McKinsey & Company show that for every 100 men promoted to managers, only, I want you to hear this, only 60 black women are promoted. We know that from our previous hearings on the business case for diversity that the lack of women and people in color in leadership positions will reduce a company's ability to, 1, provide depth of consumer insight, 2, capture new markets, and 3, yield greater financial returns, which will eventually take a significant financial and competitive toll on organizations. Strategies such as fair pathways to promotion, along with unconscious bias training and sponsorship programs, are tried and true resources for women to navigate advancement barriers to their own career development. According to the 2019 Boston Consulting Group report, when companies were asked about diversity obstacles in the workplace, nearly half of the companies responded that they lacked the appropriate mechanism to track promotions and ensure major project assignments are bias-free. As we examine the diversity practices of America's workforce, it is clear from our hearings and data collections that we can do better. We need to identify, to discuss, and to implement accountability metrics and strategic interventions so that companies and government agencies deliver real results. It is our hope that our expert witnesses today share best practices that, if implemented, could help organizations retain diverse employees and promote them to the highest organizational levels. Due to the foreseeable changes in American society, according to the United States Census Bureau, the population of the United States will be majority minority, meaning women and minorities will comprise 47% and 27% of the workforce, respectively. Therefore, it will be incumbent on all of our leaders to embrace the changing demographics by establishing a culture that yields the best economic outcome and the most competitive advantage. With that, I would like to ask unanimous consent to add the following report from PricewaterhouseCoopers entitled, Mending Gender Gap, Advancing Tomorrow's Women Leaders in Financial Services, to be entered into the record. It is entered without objection. I reserve the balance of my time for the chair of the Financial Services Committee, Chairwoman Maxine Waters. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
I thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I first want to thank our witnesses for testifying before this subcommittee today. And I look forward to hearing from all of you and learning more about the most successful strategies for changing workplace cultures within the financial services industry. Over the past 9 months, this subcommittee has spent our time seeking to ensure that the financial industry, along with, frankly, many other sectors of the U.S. economy, is reaping the benefits of our country's diversity. Research shows that companies with more diverse workforces outperform their less diverse competitors. Diversity builds collective intelligence by helping teams remain more objective, process information, frankly, more carefully, and even price stocks more accurately. In mid-August, Morgan Stanley's research issued a report demonstrating that gender-diverse firms tend to outperform their less diverse peers globally. Morgan Stanley's new study identified that firms that prioritize equal representation receive a boost of up to 2.8% in average returns annually, which translates into a sizable sum if you're a firm as large as, say, Walmart or Apple. Diversity and inclusion are separate issues that must be addressed. In an article published in the Harvard Business Review titled "Diversity Doesn't Stick Without Inclusion" by one of our witnesses today, Dr. Sherbin, I look forward to your testimony in a bit. She states that part of the problem is that diversity and inclusion are so often lumped together that they're assumed to be the same thing. But that's just not the case. In the context of the workplace, diversity equals representation. And without inclusion, the crucial connections that attract diverse talent, foster innovation, and lead to the kind of business growth that I was outlining won't happen. Dr. Sherbin, I could not agree more with your sentiment, and it is one thing to hire diverse talent, but in order to reap the benefits of a diverse workforce, there must be inclusion. We have heard from previous witnesses in the subcommittee about best practices that foster inclusion, such as sponsorship and mentorship, employees resource groups, and diversity councils. I look forward to discovering more today. Although a company may be able to increase recruitment, it is equally as important to focus efforts on making sure the environment is inclusive for retention. More can be done in both areas, but it is encouraging to see corporations throughout the industry proactively taking on the mission to improve diversity and inclusion for their workforces. The progress has been slow, and more can always be done, but good work is being accomplished. The best practices that we're going to hear about today can be held up as examples throughout the sector and used as starting blocks for others in the industry to increase diversity and inclusion. I thank you, Madam Chairman, for this hearing today, and I'd like to reserve the balance of my time for the ranking member when he arrives. Thank you. I yield back.
Without objection. Today, we welcome the testimony of a very diverse and distinguished panel of 5. Thank you for being here. First, we welcome the testimony of Bernard Ginyard, the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Goodwin. He implements programs that embed diversity and inclusion practices into the fabric of the firm's culture, systems, and process, which positively impacts the employee's experience. He is a board member of the Association of Law Firm Diversity Professionals. Next, Rashika Tulshian, a leading diversity and inclusion strategist and founder of Candor. She writes regularly for publications including Harvard Business Review, Forbes, and the Seattle Times. Her articles have appeared in the Wall Street Journal, Time, and Bloomberg. She is also the inaugural Distinguished Professional in Residence for the Communication Department at Seattle University. Next, Patricia Mota, President and CEO, Hispanic Alliance for Career Advancement. She has a strong history of serving the Latino community as reflected by her service on various not-for-profit boards and committees, most recently serving as a board member on the Illinois Treasure Latina Advisory Council and the Indiana University Latino Alumni Association Board. Next, Rod Graves, who is the Executive Director of the Fitz Pollard Alliance Foundation. His experience spans over 37 years, including serving in a number of executive positions in the NFL, including Senior Vice President Football Administration at the National Football League and General Manager of the Arizona Cardinals. Next, Dr. Laura Sherbin, the Managing Director of Culture at Work. She is an economist who specializes in the creation of advantage through inclusion and diversity. Most recently, she was co-president at the Center for the Talent Innovation in New York City, a premier think tank and content provider that studies global workplace diversity. The witnesses are reminded that their oral testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. Without objection, your written statement will be part of the record. The witnesses are reminded to turn their microphones on and abide by the 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, yellow means wrap it up, and red means stop. Mr. Ginyard, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation of your testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Beatty. So, at Goodwin, we're committed to promoting diversity within our firm and in the legal profession, and also fostering an inclusive environment in which each attorney and professional can excel and thrive. Diversity and inclusion are core values at Goodwin, and we believe that that make us stronger as a firm, as a provider of legal services, and as an employer. It's also a matter of justice for us. We believe that equity demands a diverse workforce in a legal profession, and we have a lengthy track record of enabling equal access to the legal systems through our pro bono efforts and our broad non-discrimination policies. Inclusion at Goodwin, which was established in 2014 and is led by our firm's chairman emeritus, David Hashmal, drives the firm's diversity and inclusion strategic initiatives. Some of our core efforts include bias disruption campaigns, inclusive leadership training and upward feedback for our leaders, sponsorship initiatives, and also practice group action plans. These strategies are complemented by the robust engagement of our affinity groups, which includes our Committee on Racial and Ethnic Diversity, Pride, and our Women's Initiative, all which promote connectivity, networking, and advancement within our firm. At Goodwin, we recognize that despite significant commitment and our hard work, we need to work even smarter and faster on our diversity goals, focusing on development, retention, advancement, and leadership. To demonstrate our leadership in this area and our willingness to disrupt the status quo, we have elected to sign on to 2 bold initiatives led by Diversity Labs. The first, the Mansfield Rule, a law firm slate diversity initiative launched in 2017. And second, the Move the Needle Fund, a collaborative effort designed and funded with $5 million to test innovative initiatives to create a more diverse and inclusive legal profession. Under the Mansfield Rule, law firms who are participating are expected to consider diverse slates of candidates for influential and leadership roles within our organizations. They are also encouraged to create and post descriptions of these leadership roles to ensure that the processes and election and/or appointment to these roles are transparent and accessible to all lawyers. As an example of the Mansfield Rule in action, if a firm's management committee has identified a short list of 5 candidates for an opening on its executive committee, under the rule, at least 2 candidates must be a woman, attorney of color, or LGBTQ+. Firms that consider diverse attorneys for 70% or more of their leadership committees qualify for Mansfield certification. After successfully achieving Mansfield certification last year, the firm recently achieved Mansfield certification for a second time, and Diversity Lab also named us as Mansfield Certified Plus, being recognized for our achievement of at least 30% in our leadership ranks. Currently, Goodwin's most senior leadership committees are 35% diverse, which is a significant achievement for the firm and it signals the progress we're making ever since implementing the rule. The second initiative, which recently has been launched, is a trailblazing effort which brings 5 law firms together and partner with Diversity Lab in a joint venture, which allows us to actually collaborate with with each other, but at the same time, partner with 25 general counsels at influential companies to pursue bold, public, metric-based goals to be achieved within 5 years. For us, we've chosen the following goals based on specific challenges we at Goodwin are trying to address. By 2025, January 2025, the diversity of Goodwin's senior associate population and its population of partners and equity partners elevated in the preceding 5 years will match or exceed its entry-level associate diversity, which will be consistent with or greater than the diversity of graduating law student classes by gender, race, ethnicity, and LGBTQ+ identity. Additionally, the collective composition of all firm leadership committees will be at least 40% diverse. To achieve our goals, we're not only investing $1.25 million, but we'll be testing out various initiatives. The benefits of signing up for such bold initiatives allows us to set bold goals, create transparency and accountability, garnering significant investments, fueling innovation, and perhaps most importantly, enabling opportunities for collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Tu Xian, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral testimony on your presentation.
Good afternoon. A special thank you, Chair Beatty and members of the committee for inviting me to talk about this important issue of promoting inclusion in the workplace. I come here representing my views and mine alone as an immigrant woman of color and a working mother. I'd like to focus on 4 key areas today where women, and I'm centering women of color in my testimony, face barriers to retention and advancement at work with data-backed proposed solutions. Multiple studies show women are graduating college at higher rates than men, but remain severely underrepresented in leadership roles in America. We are forced to navigate workplaces designed without us in mind, despite ample evidence highlighting why harnessing diversity and inclusion in the workplace is key to American competitiveness, prosperity, and innovation. For women of color, the situation is dire. White women hold 19% of C-suite positions, but women of color hold only 4%. Research finds women of color face harmful stereotypes about our professional competence, leadership ability, and behavior. This data is extremely significant because by 2060, the majority of all women in the United States will be women of color. A Washington Post headline last month stated, for the first time, most new working-age hires in the United States are people of color. We simply cannot turn away from designing an equitable workforce. The demographics are changing in front of our very eyes. The first barrier is the challenge of working motherhood. It is a travesty that 1 in 4 American women go back to work within 10 days of giving birth. We are the only developed country in the world that doesn't guarantee paid maternity leave, so too many women have to make the heartbreaking choice between a paycheck and giving birth. At work, we face the motherhood penalty, where we are penalized by lower pay, job opportunities, and even perceived competence for having children. And guess what men receive when they become dads? A fatherhood bonus. No wonder 43% of working mothers leave corporate America. One research-backed solution is to federally mandate paid family leave, not only for when a woman gives birth, but also to avail of when a family member is sick. Offer it to mothers and fathers, so not only women are responsible for childcare. By the way, a study found businesses save $19 billion annually by retaining female employees when they offer fully paid 16 weeks maternity leave. It's literally a win-win for businesses, families, and our society. Second, women need sponsors. We do not need more mentors. In fact, research shows we have many more casual mentors at work than men. Sponsorship means having more leaders personally invested in our success who offer us the top jobs, the high visibility projects, and the insider knowledge that men often get informal access to on the golf course or dinners that women aren't invited to. Early pilots of sponsorship programs in some innovative companies have yielded positive results in the advancement of high potential women. Third, we need office housework to be distributed equitably. Office housework refers to the unglamorous work, the meeting notes, ordering of lunches, mentoring of interns, etc., that does not get recognized or lead to promotion. Office housework is disproportionately assigned to women and people of color. One study found women do 30% more of it than white men. We must ensure women don't get saddled with these tasks because they have a real and recognizable impact on their career advancement. So in short, equitably distribute office housework. Fourth, and most importantly, leaders must address their own personal biases and also actively champion equity. In writing my book, I found that across industry, organization size, and geography, companies that exhibited more gender equality than their peers all had only one trait in common: leadership buy-in for diversity. We must ensure leaders of corporations and governments alike understand the unique barriers faced by professional women and people of color and work actively to dismantle them. Advocacy efforts must be backed by well-resourced chief diversity offices. Prioritize inclusion so women can safely report harassment or bias without retaliation. Members of Congress, there is no issue we're facing today that doesn't impact underrepresented communities more acutely. Climate change, immigration, violence, poverty, access to health care, the list is long and you are well familiar with it. What type of innovative solutions could we design if more women, especially women of color, were in leadership roles to tackle them? It is absolutely crucial for the future of the American democracy to prioritize championing women. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Ms. Patricia Mota. Ms. Mota, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation on your testimony.
Dear Chairwoman Beatty, Ranking Member Wagner, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to share my testimony, and thank you to you and your staff for your dedication to building a more inclusive workforce and society. I serve as an advocate for access and equity, personally fulfilling my mission to close the education career gaps that I have personally faced and that many in our Black and Brown communities face. I serve as President and CEO for the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, or ACE, a national nonprofit dedicated to the employment, development, and advancement of current and aspiring Latino professionals. Our mission is to positively impact the American workplace by cultivating the pipeline of talent and providing professionals the insight, access, and support to be successful in their careers. Since 1982, and with a network of over 64,000 members, 90 corporate partners across the country, ACE works with employers to remain competitive in an increasingly dynamic economy by helping them attract, retain, and develop Latino talent. We carry out our mission through 3 core areas. 1, talent acquisition, programs, services, opportunities where we actively connect talent with employers. 2, pipeline and leadership development, programs that cultivate, build, and develop the pipeline of Latino talent from high school level to the C-suite. And thirdly, thought leadership and branding, events, roundtable discussions on diversity and inclusion best practices, and professional and employer success stories and impact. ACE's vision to see a world where Latinos reach their full potential for themselves and for our communities that we serve feel a bit closer to reality when I witness our year-round programs and events. Yet, we are disproportionately underrepresented in highly compensated professional and leadership roles across corporate America and other sectors. We are part of the youngest and the fastest growing population group in the United States, and with an older and more diverse workforce, Latinos' access to education, meaningful jobs, and advancement is critical for the economic progress of our country. Statistics show the impact of Latinos on the economy today and in the future. U.S. Latinos are the current and future workforce. In 2018, Latinos made up 29 million workers in the U.S., and by 2020, U.S. Latinos will make up 74% of the growth in new workers. U.S. Latinos are creating jobs. Within the last decade, 86% of all new businesses in the U.S. were launched by Latinos, with Latinas, women, creating businesses 6 times faster than any other group. U.S. Latinos are educated. More students are completing high school and college than ever before. High school dropout rates decreased from 34% in 1996 to 10% in 2016, and college enrollment increased from 35% to 47% in the same time frame. Employers must focus on the promotion and retention of diverse talents in order to build a more inclusive workforce. At a former employer, I was told that I was not promoted to the next position because of my qualifications, but that the selection committee felt more comfortable with the other candidate. The other candidate was an older white male. The selection committee was all white. While this case was blatant, this is not uncommon where biases against race, gender, or age hinder someone's opportunity for career progression. My top 3 recommendations of many are: first, to require bias-inclusive diversity training. Formal training can help identify some of the conscious and unconscious biases that reduce the negative effects in the workplace. ASE provides access to these trainings. 2, require a diverse slate of candidates for all and top-level positions. Diverse leadership teams boost innovation and profits. According to the Boston Consulting Group, diverse leadership teams account for 45% innovation growth versus 26% with below-average diversity scores, and 45% market share growth. Engaging and intentionally partnering with organizations like ASE grants employers with access to diverse talent. And lastly, support employee participation in affinity groups and leadership programs. Programs like ASE's Women's Leadership Program, Mujeres de ASE, which empowers Latinas to succeed professionally and thrive personally, are key to moving the needle. The program is a cohort model, a safe space, 24 hours, culturally relevant, coaching, leadership assessments, engagement of Latina executives, successful role models, and mentors and sponsors that have effectively catapulted the careers of our alumni. 40% receiving a promotion within less than 6 months, an additional 30% within less than 12 months. In order to build a more inclusive and diverse workforce, today's employers must consistently, intentionally invest in these and several practices over the long term. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Rod Graves. Mr. Graves, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation on your testimony.
Chairman, thank you, and to the members, thank you for your work, and I certainly appreciate the opportunity to address you today. My name is Rod Graves. I am the Executive Director of the Fritz Pollard Alliance. I joined the FPA in June of 2019 after serving 35 years in the National Football League. I also worked 2 years in the United States Football League before joining the NFL. I have served in a number of executive and leadership roles. My career has been influenced by great personnel men like John Wooten, Tank Younger, Milt Davis, Charles Garcia, Bill Nunn, Dick Daniels, and Bill Tobin. Fritz Pollard is an advocacy group. We were co-founded in 2003 by the late Johnny L. Cochran Jr. and civil rights attorney Cyrus Mary of Mary and Scalette in Washington, D.C. For the past 15 years, the group has been led by John Wooten, a former NFL player and team executive. Mr. Wooten's dedication to diversity and equal opportunity set the foundation for our organization. He retired in the spring of this year. Our members include coaches, scouts, front office personnel, and game day officials. Our primary focus is on the men and women of color within the National Football League. Our mission is to champion diversity in the NFL through education and to provide our members with resources that will help them to succeed at every level of the game. Our vision is to see the diversity of leadership in the business plan of every sports team. We believe that diversity is good for the game. The Rooney Rule originated with the Fritz Pollard Alliance. The rule, named after the late Dan Rooney, owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, requires NFL teams in search of a head coach or general manager to interview multiple diverse candidates. Enforcement rests with the NFL commissioner. The efforts behind the Rooney Rule have been extremely successful. The rule has produced a record number of minority head coaches and general managers and has built up pipelines of talent around the league. We have also seen the rule adopted by corporations such as Xerox, Intel, Facebook, Microsoft, Goldman Sachs, and others. The Rooney Rule has impacted both my personal and professional success. In 2004, Bill Bidwell, owner of the Arizona Cardinals, hired Dennis Green as the organization's first African-American head coach and made me general manager. We were the first Black GM head coach combination in NFL history. As a team executive, I participated in the hiring of several head coaches, coordinators, and other football executives. The exposure that my organization and I gained to diverse candidates as a result of the Rooney Rule was invaluable. The Rooney Rule benefits diverse candidates as well. The exposure gained by the diverse candidates during an interview process helps them to be better prepared, to be more informed about the industry and the organizations that they are seeking to join. What we've learned over the years about the Rooney Rule and the other equal opportunity initiatives developed in the NFL, that alone, they do not guarantee positive outcomes for diversity. Sustained success requires a commitment by those making the decisions. We have seen that commitment by a number of NFL teams. It is most apparent where teams have shown a commitment to diversity of leadership and have created a D&I strategy for their entire organization. Our goal is to work with the NFL to expand this approach and to embrace diversity as good and right for the game. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Sherbin, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation on your testimony.
Thank you, Chairwoman Beatty, Ranking Member Wagner, and the members of the subcommittee, not just for the invitation to come today, but also to your time and attention to this very important agenda. Time is our scarcest resource, and it is reflective of the importance of the mission that we all come here today to solve, that we're all taking the time. As you may know, I've done a great deal of research on this topic and have had the opportunity to partner with many companies to help them achieve the goal that we're talking about today. I believe it is a core responsibility of leading companies and also of government to ensure that one of the nation's greatest assets, our talent pool, is fully engaged to its greatest potential for the benefit of individuals, for the benefit of companies, for the benefit of our collective union. Even as women are achieving degrees in record numbers, as we all know, there are no women running major financial services companies. Fewer than 1 in 5 have C-suite roles, according to the recent McKinsey & Company report. The concrete ceiling remains firmly in place. And I know it is not for lack of effort, for I've been on the front lines with many of these companies. Financial services companies were among the first to embrace the cultivation of greater gender diversity, and 90% of them today say they're committed to it. Despite decades of effort, the financial services gender equality movement have not made the necessary gains. Why? Diversity-focused tactics, as we've discussed, don't work without an effort to create a truly inclusive culture that not only attracts women, but makes them feel valued and welcomed. Diversity is being asked to attend the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. To truly change the ratios of women and other marginalized groups who are in power, it's important to first look at the factors that cause the gap and then devise solutions to overcome them. The first very critical factor is the value proposition of the industry. Financial services careers are known for offering lucrative salaries and benefits packages in exchange for high-demand careers. Long hours, extensive travel, and personal sacrifices make these roles often unsustainable, not just for women with children, but also anyone with caregiving responsibilities. Relationship capital is a second area. This goes beyond just mentors and sponsors. Relationships make or break a career. It takes a village to raise a family, we all know. Well, it also takes a village to advance your career in any industry and to advance your personal agenda. According to Working Mother Media research, women are considerably less likely than men to receive advice on how to advance and to be invited to the very critical tables. We also find that there are hidden off-ramps within, especially the financial services sectors. Because the networks are notoriously closed, many women don't get the critical opportunities to position themselves for success. This includes P&L experience, but it stretches all the way to development opportunities that ultimately lead to promotions and pay raises. And we all know that bias still undercuts opportunity in this industry. What it will take is a secure commitment and modeling from leaders. Any culture shift needs to start with a support and participation of leadership. Leaders need to be visible in their participation to make sure it happens and articulate its importance. Diversity, I believe, is a business problem and needs to be treated as such. We also need to ensure that we are measuring what matters and focusing on accountability, conducting regular pay equity audits, and ensuring that employees are being paid fairly for equal work. Track not just the lagging indicators of diversity, the representation, the level, and turnover, but also the leading indicators of inclusion, leader behaviors, candidate access to stretch and development opportunities, and perception of bias within the system. Because when it comes to bias, perception is reality. By treating diversity and inclusion like the business problem it is, companies can, in the financial services industry, can make impressive strides towards a better future for the industry overall. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Thank all of the witnesses for their powerful testimony and also for the information that you provided for us. And now I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for a series of questions. Let me start by saying I'd like to be invited to the dance, and I certainly like to dance. So I thank you for that. I am so glad, Mr. Graves, that you talked about Dan Rooney, so I won't have to go through what I have here. His son visited me a couple weeks ago that he was so intrigued with my Beatty rule, which was patterned after the Rooney rule with the Federal Reserve. Because what we found in a 100-year history, there had not been a person of color, African American, to be one of the presidents. And along with a lot of other things, the very qualified Raphael Bostic was made in 2017, the president of the Federal Reserve out of Atlanta. But my question is, based on what you talked about with the NFL and all of your successes, what would you say to your colleagues sitting here that we should do to make sure that we get more minorities and women and people from Appalachia and veterans? How do we make this happen? I mean, we don't have a Dan Rooney and a Joyce Beatty, let's say. How do we make that happen? Microphone, please.
Thank you. I believe at its core that all of the work and commitment, the great work that all of us do, is only a part of what's required for sustainable success behind D&I. I believe that without an actual commitment by those that are making the decisions, that the foundation is at least wobbly, if not insecure. And what I found through my work with great owners like Ed McCaskey of the Chicago Bears and Bill Bidwell of the Arizona Cardinals, that diversity has to be intentional. And it has to be an effort and a commitment by those from the very top to make it happen. And so with all the preparation programs that are created, if you don't have a commitment by those that are making the decisions, then our chances for success are just that, chance.
Thank you. My time is running out, so I'm going to ask a series of questions and ask everyone to respond to the same question. So we are here with my ranking member and colleagues on both sides of the aisle because at the end of our time here, we want to be able to say we made a difference. So tell me, what would be the number one thing you would advise us to do as we are on this diversity and inclusion journey? We'll start with you, Dr. Sherbin.
The number one thing I would
Microphone, please.
Thank you for the reminder. The number one thing is measuring the leading indicators of inclusion and diversity, creating transparency around them, and holding ourselves and each other accountable for reaching them.
Thank you. Ms. Moda.
Sure. I would say to add to that is just being aware of our own individual biases and our own capabilities, because I think the more that we are aware ourselves and as organizations, the more familiar and aware we become of others and helping that bridge of understanding.
Ms. Toole-Sheehan.
I would really focus on the most underrepresented voice, whose voice is really not being heard, and go there and find out what are the institutional and what are the barriers that are holding that person and those communities back, and start from there.
Mr. Ginyard.
I would say communication, being able to ensure that we are sharing what our goals and our destinations will be so that we are engaging everyone to participate in the initiatives. The other piece is pushing it down into the organization so that everyone feels that they're accountable and it's not just stratified at the top.
Mr. Graves. Microphone, please.
I would encourage you to focus on a grassroots program that grows diversity from the very bottom up through organizations.
Thank you. Let me just wrap up quickly because I have 5 seconds. What I also heard from you, that all of you, pay equity, access, adjusting the interview process, culture change, childcare, equity, and education. This was very helpful to us, and I want to again thank you for being here. Now I recognize my friend and the ranking member for 5 minutes for questions.
I thank the chairwoman as always. Let me start by asking that by unanimous consent I can enter the ranking member's remarks into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. According to Mercer's When Women Thrive report, women hold 26% of senior management positions and only 15% of executive positions in the finance industry. These figures have stayed relatively flat over the past decade, sadly. Dr. Sherbin, why are we not seeing more gains with respect to women and women in color in senior management positions in the financial services industry?
The critical piece to understand is that while the industry has done a lot of initiatives and programmings on this front, they haven't changed the core concentrations of where access to power is in these industries. They have not changed the work norms and the way work is done in the same way, honestly, that some other sectors have, asking the very critical questions. Do I need to travel? Do I need to spend long hours in the office? Must I truly be available 24/7? And should I come back 10 days after having a child? These are all very critical questions to ask in terms of how work gets done. And then access to power in terms of relationships and how you advance in your career.
And you've been advising companies in this regard, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Great. I'd like to submit for the record, Madam Chairman, the 5th Annual Women in the Workplace Study conducted by Lean In and McKinsey and Company.
Without objection.
This study comprises data from 329 companies. We've been talking about data, and Ms. Toole-Sheehan, I appreciated your comments about data and being deliberate and driven by that. 329 companies with a collective 13 million people on their payrolls, and shows that while real progress has been made at the C-suite level, there is still much more progress to be made for women trying to grasp that first rung of the management ladder. The study found that 3 main areas where companies should focus their efforts to create a more inclusive office that reaps the economic benefits we know come with diverse workforce. Companies should focus on better understanding the corporate pipeline, focusing on the culture of work, and we've talked a little bit about that, and turning commitment to diversity into real action. And some of you are on the front lines of doing that. Dr. Sherman, your research has concluded that mandates do not work when trying to maintain a diverse workplace. Diversifying the workforce is only one piece of that puzzle, and the more crucial component to me is maintaining that diversity. Can you talk us through how companies can do that?
Absolutely. So mandates, in the same way as recruitment, they get people in a chair. They get them in the seat. They don't ensure that their voice is heard, that they're valued, that they're able to contribute. In fact, you'll find that most of the gains that we talk about in terms of financial gains and innovation gains from having diversity, a necessary condition is inclusion, to ensure that people are able to contribute to their full potential. This also ensures that they will stay and they will advance. Without inclusion, diversity becomes a revolving door.
That's absolutely correct. And we've talked a lot on this committee about the differences between diversity and inclusion, about unconscious biases, about how we make a workforce culture that doesn't have that revolving door. And I'm very concerned about those at the bottom rung and then being able to maintain as they try and move up the ladder. Ms. Tolshin, do you have any comments in this regard, especially when it comes to the inclusion side of things?
Absolutely, and I actually want to take this wonderful definition of diversity being, invited to the party, inclusion being asked to dance. Verna Moyers from Netflix coined that, and add that equity is very central to this, and equity is being part of the planning committee. So understanding what are some of the institutional, historical barriers that have kept women and women of color out of these, very, very highly coveted roles, and really seeking to eliminate those barriers. And without that, we're not going to move.
You're absolutely correct, and I wish I had more time. I do not. I will have to yield back, but I can say that we also had discussions about the Rooney Rule, not just applying to the candidates, but to those interviewing, and that is absolutely key, I think, to what we're trying to sustain here. So I thank you all, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and let me thank all of you, our witnesses, for being here today. We certainly appreciate you taking the time and sharing your testimony. As many of you have outlined, making an investment in diversity, inclusion, and equity is not only the right thing to do, the data show us that it makes good business sense. Companies and organizations function more effectively, experience increased productivity, and greater profitability. So in order to effectively create a culture of inclusion, it requires, as you said, intentionality and leadership. For far too long, leaders of corporations have paid lip service to the importance of diversity, and I'm grateful that in this committee, led by our most capable chairwoman, that we are focused on identifying solutions and efforts that can and will disrupt the status quo. When I first came to Congress, I was concerned about the lack of focus on historically black colleges and universities, so I launched the Congressional Bipartisan HBCU Caucus. I am a two-time graduate. I spent 40 years on the campus of Bennett College and HBCU in Greensboro. And so the caucus is focused on raising national awareness, educating members of Congress, and increasing federal investments in HBCUs. And every year, these schools produce more than 40% of black engineers, healthcare professionals, and lawyers, just to name a few. So when I met with companies and financial institutions, when I meet with them, I always tell them, if HBCUs are not a part of industry's diversity and inclusion strategies, you're not doing it right. HBCUs are a critical pipeline of talent, cultivating strong partnerships and relationships with these schools can provide industry with an opportunity to diversify their workplaces. So I look forward to hearing more about the research and the work that you've done. But let me ask this question. To increase the diversity in law firms and across the legal profession, some firms have implemented the Mansfield Rule, where the firm considers of at least 30% women, racial or ethnic minorities, and members of the LGBTQ community. So, Mr. Gunyard, your firm, Goodwin, is considered a leader when it comes to diversity. So can you share whether the Mansfield Rule is working at Goodwin and other firms and increasing the diversity in leadership there?
Yes, at Goodwin is definitely having an impact. Stated earlier, we've increased our representation on our most senior leadership committees to 35% diversity. In addition to that, it's also elevated the visibility of focusing on ensuring that there are diverse slates. There's research that states that the more you increase the final slate of panelists for positions, increases the likelihood of offering an opportunity or elevating someone to a position who has a certain kind of diversity, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, or LGBTQ. I wanted to go back to your early question around the HBCUs.
Okay.
One of the initiatives that we're partnering with, as we talked about earlier, which is the Move the Needle initiative, one of the things that we'll be doing with these other firms and also these general counsels is exploring additional schools, law schools, that tend to get overlooked to find that top talent. We tend to kind of fish in the same ponds for the same talent, and so our approach to really find diverse talent and add and create or expand the pool is really exploring different universities where we can find racial and ethnic diversity.
So let me ask you how public disclosure helps law firms and other organizations be accountable more for improving diversity and inclusion.
Oh, definitely. Well, first, the Mansfield Rule, the first iteration of it, we had roughly about 40 firms sign on. It's increased to roughly 60 or 70 firms as a result of the recognition of being certified. But public disclosure creates a level of accountability. And if you are familiar with law firms, we don't want to put numbers out there because we don't want to really have targets or quotas or the assumption thereof. But
Okay,
when
let me move on if I can. I'd hate to disrupt you. I wanted to ask Ms. Tushman a question. So what steps can we take to help industry shed their implicit and explicit biases?
Thank you.
Yeah, we've got 24 seconds.
I'm going to, loaded question, 24 seconds. Really quickly, it has to come from the education and personal awareness building around personal biases. And what we find is a lot of leaders, they operate from good intentions. They want to do the right thing. They want to engage more women and people of color. They just don't sit down and think about how their actions are contributing to systemic bias and fishing from the same pond, hiring people who look like them.
Thank you very much, and I'll probably like to send you some questions a little bit later on. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee. Mr. Kustoff is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, for convening today's hearing, and thanks to the witnesses for appearing this afternoon. Mr. Graves, if I could, because you've had a long and distinguished career in the NFL, and you've talked about the importance of the Rooney Rule. Out of curiosity, does the NFL have a Rooney-type rule as it relates to ownership of the teams?
That I'm not aware of, but I can check into it.
It does seem like if the ownership were more reflective of the executives or vice versa, that in theory, and I don't want to put you on the spot because you were at the NFL, but that could put some pressure on the NFL to further increase diversity among its coaching and executive ranks. Is that a fair statement?
I would assume that it's fair.
Dr. Sherbin, if I could with you, at least in 2 of the opening statements that were made by the witnesses, at least 2 of you talked about mentoring and maybe also coupling with that networking. Can you talk about, as it relates to your study, the importance of networking and mentoring as it relates to growing diversity? Of course, you've talked about it in the financial services world, so I'll ask you whether it relates to financial services or other industries, if you could.
Absolutely. So mentoring and networking, and in particular sponsorship, extends far beyond the financial services industry. It is very simply the way power is transferred in our society. You see these relationships everywhere. It is about seeing someone junior than you, believing in them, investing in their success, and putting them up for a promotion. As we all know, promotions happen in rooms that we are not privy to. So what we need is someone in that room to say our name, and that is a member of our network, ideally our sponsor.
Is there a way to increase the mentoring and the networking, or are there ways?
There are very key ways that companies have made great strides with. One is exposure and opportunity, and truly ensuring that leaders see talent, not just that they would naturally see. Also training and proactive education to teach and coach not just leaders as potential sponsors, but also potential proteges, the right way to cultivate these relationships across difference. The fact of the matter is we live in a very segregated society, and this means that we are often asking employees in companies to create relationships across difference when they haven't done it in their personal lives. And we need to provide education so that they're successful.
Thank you. If I could, Dr. Sherman, there was a 2017 GAO study or report that found that overall minority representation in management and financial firms has slowly increased over the last decade. And if I could, as it relates specifically to financial firms, can you address the cultural changes to increase inclusion for both women and minorities?
In order to really address inclusion for women and minorities, it is around ridding of the bias, teaching individuals to work across difference, and holding individuals accountable for not just diversity, but also inclusion, which I will tell you, while it's harder to measure than diversity, it is absolutely possible. Financial services industries can measure anything. I assure you, they can measure inclusion.
And if I could, along those lines, can you compare how financial services firms are doing compared with other industries?
In many other industries, they are ahead of financial services firms in terms of representation, and we've seen it in many, many reports and through many data sources.
Thank you. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, she stepped away.
Then the chair would like to recognize you, the gentlewoman from Texas, Mrs. Garcia, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, and I'm sure if she were here, she would have yielded to me anyway.
Yes.
Thank you, and thank you again, Madam Chair, for putting this hearing together. I think you're absolutely right. We can have a sit at the table, but if we're not given a voice or not part of the conversation, we may not really be there. And certainly, when I go to a dance, I sure do want to dance, but I'd rather dance rock and roll than a waltz. So what the dance is all about is important too. And it takes commitment, doesn't it? And Mr. Graves, I really like what you said. No matter what we do, it comes from actual commitment to whatever program or whether initiative or whether plan we want to put in place. So and it's something, quite frankly, that we can't legislate, or can we? Do you have any ideas of what we should do to kind of ensure that some of these companies demonstrate actual commitment, whether it's through an incentive or a penalty or, a bonus of some sort? I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? What can we do to get commitment from people?
Well, I think you're referring to a matter of the heart. I think with all the data that we have about the positive effects of diversity, I think it still comes down to individuals making a decision about what they believe is not only good for society, but right. And I think you have to have more of those type of people at the table in the room where the decisions are made. And I think that's the first step to really changing our culture.
Okay. Is Dr. I forget, what was it? Sherwin. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to offer something that might be a little counterintuitive.
Okay.
We spend a lot of time in these studies asking individuals who are not able to rise up in organizations why they believe they're not achieving the success that they need. We should also ask the majority individuals within companies what's not working for them in terms of including those who are different than themselves. Many industries will talk about the frozen middle or middle managers. These traditionally for large companies are the hardest portion of the organization to budge. They're the ones that have serious day-to-day pressures and don't always have the time to do something differently. And intervening with that group at that level to hear from them why they're not able to champion and support and do something different, as you've said, every day, and then addressing their challenges could be a very powerful step in truly changing behavior.
Ms. Mota, you mentioned engagement with affinity groups and groups of groups other than themselves. Have you seen that work anywhere? Is there a lesson learned in something that you've seen that where you can expose companies to certain organizations, certain networks, that then they can see the value of inclusion and diversity, and has it changed behavior?
Absolutely. I think it's also known as a best practice in terms of whether it's employee resource groups or business resource groups that are, there's Latino, African American, women, LGBTQ+, but one of the values with our partnership and working with those affinity groups is that it's bringing in executive level, whether it's Latino, Latina, or executive level women, executive level African American. It's bringing them visibility to those folks through those affinity networks that they may not see on a day-to-day basis at their own companies. And there's a study done by the Center of Talent Innovation, specifically on Latinos at work, and the study says that 76% of Latinos in corporate America repress some portion of their identity they cover. And those that do repress are the ones that are being promoted, because when they look at the executive presence, they don't see themselves reflected, and so they, part of the study and the research says that they feel they have to be someone else in order to get to those higher level ranks within their organizations. And so affinity groups provide that outlet, not only to share the challenges, but also to be able to connect with executive level of folks that represent the same affinity that they can aspire to and get advice from through those networks.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure since Representative Dean yielded her time to me, can I have another 5 minutes for myself?
The chair will give you another minute to ask another question.
I just want to quickly ask Mr. It's a simple yes or no, unless you feel like you have to elaborate. Is the Mansfield rule also apply to making partner? Because that's a tougher nut to crack.
Yes.
It does? Very good. Well, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez. Is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, everybody, for being here, for all the work that you do on this important issue, and for all the attention that you've taken with us here today. As I say, most times I'm in this subcommittee, I've been so proud of the work that we've done thus far, shining a light on a very important area that is very difficult to solve. And I think we've made great strides in gathering information and best practices across different industries, not just the financial services sector, but really excited to have you all here. Mr. Graves, I want to start with you. Like yourself, I come from the NFL. I was a player at one point. I want to thank you for being here and sharing how the Rooney Rule has positively impacted your experience working in the NFL. The effect of the Rooney Rule discussed in your testimony is astounding, and I think it shows how effective the rule has been in the NFL. I, for one, certainly have benefited from it. I played for Tony Dungy and Jim Caldwell, two African-American coaches, two people I consider incredible leaders, and I'm just blessed to call them friends, frankly. And as you may know, Chairwoman Beatty has a great bill similar to the Rooney Rule, H.R. 281, the Beatty Rule, which would require that in making the appointment of a bank president, Federal Reserve Bank must interview at least one diverse candidate. I was glad to support this bill as a co-sponsor and vote in favor of the bill's final passage. I know that the NFL continues to tweak the Rooney Rule and kind of look for ways to make it more effective and better. And I was hoping you could maybe give us an update so we might be able to think through what, we just voted on it, but what might be next for us? Where is the NFL going in this regard?
Well, thank you, Congressman. One thing I think it's imperative to point out is that our work in this area is evolutionary. It is not stagnant. And since the rule was conceived and implemented back in 2003, I think it was, we have done things to enhance the rule. Initially, it was a requirement to the teams to interview one minority or diverse candidate. Now the rule requires that you interview multiple. We also ask owners or decision makers to keep notes that can be requested by the commissioner. We also ask that the decision maker, the final decision maker, be involved throughout the process and not at intermittent points. So these are the types of things that we are doing to ensure that the rule becomes stronger and that we move toward the results that we're looking for.
So more documentation and then more candidates generally.
That's correct.
Thank you. Ms. Mota, turning to you. So connecting diverse talent pools to companies that would greatly benefit from more diversity can often be a challenge from what we hear. In your work at the Hispanic Alliance for Career Enhancement, you focused on talent acquisition and ensuring diverse individuals have access to programs that help to develop leadership skills specifically. I think that makes a ton of sense, and so I commend you for that. Can you discuss how these programs have helped to positively impact the young professionals you've worked with and the companies they've gone on to work for?
Sure, absolutely. Many of the folks that we are working with, like myself, are first generation, having obtained a college education in their families, first generation going into a professional workforce. And so with the various programs that we've we've been able to develop a strong multi-generational support network where folks more senior in their careers are able to mentor and really give advice to those that are starting off in their careers, because like myself, many of us are the first ones going into this professional landscape and understanding what are the nuances, what are the things that you do, how do you build your strategic network, those strategic relationships. And so having those through our programs, Candid Conversations, have really catapulted the careers of individuals where they're going back a lot more confident, but also know that they have a place with our organization to ask those questions where perhaps may not feel as comfortable in their place of work.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your answer and for all that you've all been doing on this topic. And with that, I will yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Gottheimer, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. According to a study conducted by the Institute for Women's Policy Research, moms, especially those with young children, are being left behind in the labor force in America. That's why I've co-sponsored several bills, including the Healthy Families Act and the Promoting Affordable Child Care for Everyone Act, that would give greater flexibility to working families and help drive up the inclusion of all parents in the workforce. We want to make sure that all moms who want to work can work. Dr. Sherman, what are some examples of flexible work arrangements that could help increase the retention and promotion of working mothers, in your opinion?
Overall, in terms of flexible working programs, one thing that we always counsel is that they should be one size fits one, not one size fits all. The way that one working mother will choose to work is incredibly different from someone else, and it's simply what works in their family. They might be the sole breadwinner, they might be the primary breadwinner, they may just be working to advance their personal mission, so it'd be one size fits all. Another very critical success factor that we found in working with a lot of companies across industries on this is that flexible work arrangements not be positioned as accommodations for working moms. This immediately reinforces the stereotypes that moms can't work as hard as their colleagues or their counterparts. I have 4 children, I can assure you I work very hard. But when flexible work arrangements are positioned as ways that we can all do our work more efficiently and effectively, it benefits not just moms, who arguably need them the most, but everyone at our companies to recognize our lives outside of work and the sustainability of the 35-year careers that we want our employees to have.
Well, thank you, I agree, and that's incredible. My wife is also a superhero, and I don't know how she does it. She also works full-time and does, it's just incredible. So if I can ask, with my remaining time, I'd like to talk about how we can create a larger slate of diverse candidates in top positions. As many of you know, the National Football League adopted the Rooney Rule, which requires league teams to interview minority candidates for head coaching and senior football operations positions to address a lack of diversity among head coaches and executives. Mr. Graves, I noticed that you used to work as the general manager from the Arizona Cardinals, as we were just talking about, and as a lifelong New York Giants fan, I'm proud to support a team that utilized the Rooney Rule when Jerry Reese was brought on as general manager, who led the Giants to 2 titles, as you probably remember. What data, Mr. Graves, is available about the increase in the number of diverse executives and coaches at the NFL since the implementation of the Rooney Rule? Do you believe the Rooney Rule has been effective?
Yes, I do. Since the implementation of the rule, let me just say, prior to the implementation of the rule, there were 6 diverse or ethnically diverse candidates who had served in the role of head coach. And since the implementation of the rule, we've seen, I believe, 19. We've had a good number of those have successful runs with Super Bowl representation, people like Tony Dungy and others who have been there. We've seen the rule extend to successful general managers, just like you mentioned, Jerry Reese, and I had the privilege of working with the Arizona Cardinals during the 2008 Super Bowl during that time. So it has been very successful in the terms of getting candidates to the table and being exposed, but obviously we have work to do to sustain those numbers. We are not at those levels that we used to be, and obviously we're working to get back to those levels and beyond. But I think the rule is imperative to the sustained success that we would like to achieve.
Did you learn things you think other industries can follow?
Well, I'm sure I have quite a bit to share with respect to the benefits of the rule, and I would certainly extend conversations on that at some other time.
I would love to spend time with you on that.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I only have a little time, so I'll yield back. I know Mr. Green has some questions. Thanks.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, who is also the chair for the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank the witnesses for appearing and my colleague for the offer of time. How much of the lack of inclusivity is due to unconscious bias versus conscious bias?
I guess I'll try to address that. So statistically, it's very hard to measure that because, this is one of those things where I believe it'll just be very hard to pull the data I've been looking at academic research around affinity bias, where essentially it's not that you're trying to discriminate against a certain group, but you have a more favorable opinion of a group that you belong to. So it could be by race, by gender, by education background, by favorite football team, etc. And so a lot of the work I do with my clients is to identify how those affinity biases show up, especially because largely I think it's very hard to deny the research around why diversity and inclusion makes business sense. I meet a lot of people who are, who really want to do the right thing. They just don't know how. And so I do think that there's a lot of this that is unconscious, and people wanting to do the right thing, just not knowing how to. But I wish I could have a statistic for you.
Candidly speaking, I didn't expect you to have statistical information. Dear friends, I have great appreciation for the Rooney Rule, the Mansfield Rule, but I'd like to visit with you very tersely about the money rule. Is there anything better than indexing the CEO's salary, bonuses, golden parachute, indexing it to money? You produce for me, I'm now the board chair, I'm speaking to the CEO. You produce for me a diverse workforce, and I will double your salary. Is anything that tops the love of money, the money rule? On prior occasions, thank you, your silence speaks volumes, I appreciate it. On prior occasions, we visited this issue. This is not the first time, Madam Chair, and I must compliment you on the subject matter. But on at least one other occasion, we had someone who explained that affixing bonuses and indexing pay raises to success engenders success. I don't know how we can get to the point where we can require this, but it just seems that the will to do this is what's required at the top. In my office, we have diversity because I will it. I desire it. It must be, and it happens. And by the way, everybody is capable, competent, and qualified. No shortage of women who are qualified. No shortage of people of color who are qualified, LGBTQ+. Just a shortage of people with the will to make it happen. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania who is here. Congresswoman Dean is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Forgive me, Chair and committee members. I did have to step out to a financial services committee, so I apologize for doing that zigzag. But I'm pleased to be here with you, Madam Chair. I thank you, all the witnesses, for raising your voice on this important issue. I was so delighted to be appointed to this now new standing subcommittee, and I took the chairwoman's command to heart. So during the district work weeks in the summertime, we held roundtables on diversity and inclusion. We held 3 different ones, one on color, one on LGBTQ, and one on disability. And they were very enlightening from folks, whether it's industry or government, who thought that they were doing things in a diverse way. Sometimes they look around and to Mr. Green's point, just look around and you'd say, we're not being intentional at all. We thought we were, but as I look around here, it's not happening. Some of the takeaways that we found, whether it was business leaders, government leaders, advocacy groups, one of the most prescient stories came from the superintendent of a local school district. He mentioned that when analyzing their hiring data, the district had highly diverse initial slate of candidates that would dramatically dip after the first rounds of interviews. So they were attracting a diverse base. And when they reviewed the data, what they realized was the reviewing panel itself was the problem. and some of you have spoken to this. The majority white panels tended to pick people who looked like them. So all of these diverse candidates, many of them fell by the wayside through unintentional bias, I would suggest. Ms. Moto, you described similar outcomes in your own personal work history and in your testimony. Can you describe successful hiring practices that can limit unintentional biases?
Yes, one would be with the selection committee, right? It's ensuring that there's a diverse representation on the hiring committee, that there's research by McKinsey that talks about that leadership teams that are able to build more of an innovative organization and boost profits represents diversity from 4 core areas. One is country of origin, second one being in terms of their industry background as a point of diversity. The third one being, we talked about gender, and then the fourth one being from career pathway. They labeled this McKinsey report, those 4 as being the top key factors when having not only the diverse candidate pool, but also diverse in terms of selection committee to be able to help eliminate some of the barriers or the biases that may occur. And then, of course, in addition to that is ensuring that there's several tools out there. There's implicit bias tools on free online, various trainings and resources to be able to ensure that perhaps before the hiring is taking place, that each of the individuals have to be required to take that assessment.
Anybody else want to add to that? And then I wanted to shift to diversity by way of disability. And I'm wondering if any of you can speak to that. We had a terrific roundtable about disability, and I guess the shocking thing is the number of underemployed, the high percentage of folks with various disabilities that are under or unemployed. And I'm struggling, just trying to help constituents match up to employment, and employers who are actively, intentionally seeking to be inclusive in that way. Do you have any best practices that any of your organizations or you have come across in your own research?
I was grateful enough to have the opportunity to partner with organizations that work on this front and conduct a piece of research. We found that there is not only a significant underemployment of individuals with disabilities, there's also a significant portion of the workforce that does currently have a disability. It may be an invisible disability.
Yeah.
They don't feel comfortable disclosing it. And as a result, they don't have the accommodations that they need to truly be successful. And they are working, we often talk about women and people of color working 2 or 4 times harder than their peers. These are individuals working 30 times harder than their peers. They're not disclosing that they can't hear in meetings or see correctly, to read slides or to read that. And they're not able to ask for accommodations. And companies, by proactively soliciting this information, signaling inclusion around this front, and addressing accommodations in a very respectful way, have made a lot of strides.
That's really terrific. And maybe you would share that research product with our committee?
Would be delighted to.
Very valuable. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield the time.
Thank you. I was going to give you another 30 seconds since your colleague probably did not tell you that she asked for some of your time.
She's a transparent thief.
But the chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Presley, is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'm an only child. I don't share anything. So, but thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kidding. Thank you, Chairwoman Beatty, and I want to thank Chairwoman Waters for her good wisdom and leadership in creating this standing committee in the first place, which provides us the forum to address these critical issues. I'm wearing 2 hats here. One is as a proud member appointed to this pioneering subcommittee, but I'm also the vice chair of the newly relaunched Task Force on Aging and Families. And so I know we were speaking about those efforts critical to retaining a younger workforce, like providing child care, and that is important. And ageism certainly exists on both sides. but there is a growing trend of discrimination and barriers to employment for our aging workforce. You know, thank God, due to medical advances, we are living longer, but people are also working longer, and not just doing that for enrichment. They're doing that because they have to. Many older Americans are living below the poverty line. And in fact, since 2011, 10,000 people in the United States have turned 65 years old every day, a trend that will continue through 2030. In 2012, only 12.5% of those over 65 were working. And in 2016, this share jumped to nearly 20%. And these projections are expected to continue to grow. So I wonder if you could offer, when it comes to our aging population, both living and working longer than ever before, when we talk about diversity and inclusion in the workforce, what can we do to make sure that we are not forgetting our seniors? Dr. Sherbin, companies often provide incentives and competitive benefits packages to recruit and retain younger employees. What are some of the incentives you think could attract and retain members of our aging community who have lived experience and great wisdom to offer and skill?
Well, indeed, it is the ability to capitalize on that wisdom and skill. In research that I've done, when you ask individuals who are relatively young in their career at just the age of 50, a considerable amount of them will say that they don't believe they have any more trajectory to advance in their career. And it's an incredibly disengaging moment to think there is nowhere more senior that I can rise because I'm seen as too old in my position. So it truly is pathways to the top at all ages that is incredibly critical to keeping this talent cohort. This talent cohort, it also intersects with the last conversation that we have. They are living much, much longer, but they're also more likely to be working with a disability and figuring out the right accommodations to ensure that they can do their jobs in the extraordinary ways that they can deliver is a very critical piece of ensuring that they can deliver.
Would anyone else like to contribute to that before I move on?
Really quickly, I just want to say that there's incredible research to show the intersection between accommodations and policies that would work really well for working moms, like flexible work arrangements, paid family and family leave, not just as soon as you give birth, etc. And there's a really good now, I think, intersection to show that it works for everybody. You know, millennials want a workforce where they can avail of parental leave, for example. The aging population would certainly benefit from having a paid time to ensure that they have, that they're able to take care of their health. So we really see a win-win across various sectors, and I think that's very key in trying to address this.
Thank you. You actually read my mind. You answered my next question, which had been around examples of flexible work arrangements that could support our aging workforce, so I thank you for getting ahead of me on that one. The Age Discrimination and Employer Act of 1967 protects applicants and employees ages 40 and older from discrimination on the basis of age in hiring, promotion, discharge, and compensation. So what are some additional protections we should be considering to better protect our aging population from discrimination in the workforce? Any thoughts? I know this is not the subject matter, but there is an intersectionality in these issues, so okay.
I can add something if you'd like, not just the protection, but also increased avenues for reporting and reporting in very safe ways. I've done a lot of work around sexual harassment and areas of explicit bias, and these are incredibly underreported. All issues of discrimination are incredibly underreported, and as a result, they're not addressed.
Yeah, and I love the accountability point. That which gets measured gets done, so.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I would like to ask unanimous consent to add to the following articles and reports to be entered into the record: Women in the Workplace, 2019 by McKinsey & Company, Wall Street Journal, Where Women Fall Behind at Work, The First Step into Management and the Women of Color, Invisible, Excluded, and Constantly on Guard. And lastly, I'd like to submit an article by Sheryl Sandberg and Rachel Thomas entitled The Gender Gap Just Isn't Fair, It's Bad for business. And lastly, I'd like to enter into the record, women in the workplace, the first step is the steepest. It is entered without objection. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony today and for giving us so much of your time to stay here. Without objections, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witnesses to the committee, which will be forwarded to the witnesses for their response. I asked our witnesses to please respond as promptly as you are able. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the committee for inclusion into the record. This hearing is adjourned.